It is the winter of 1940, and a man sits alone in a small, damp flat somewhere in South London. He is German. He has been living under a false name for several months, communicating with his handlers in Hamburg by way of a concealed wireless transmitter, and he believes, with considerable conviction, that he's winning. He has sent back reports on troop movements, on factory output, on the morale of the British public. He has been careful, thorough, and patient. Then one evening, he switches on the wireless to listen to the BBC, as he does every night to pass the time, and maintain his cover as an ordinary civilian. He hears a tune, not a coded signal, not a warning, just a tune, cheerful, brassy, the sort of thing that might play at the end of a music hall evening. He hums along without thinking, and in doing so, he makes the mistake that will eventually unravel everything. The tune is called In the Mood, and what this German agent does not know, what no German agent, courier, or intelligence officer ever fully understood, is that the British security services have been quietly using popular music, timing, and an almost absurdly simple psychological technique to help identify, monitor, and ultimately capture nearly every single German spy operating on British soil. The method was so elegant, so understated, and so perfectly suited to the British temperament that it remained largely obscured for decades after the war ended. It did not require a machine the size of a room. It did not require brilliant mathematics, though brilliant minds certainly shaped it. It required, above almost everything else, a thorough understanding of what human beings do when they are nervous, isolated, and trying to appear ordinary. This is the story of the double-cross system, and the remarkable, almost invisible role that psychology, timing, and the rhythms of everyday British life played in ensuring that not a single German spy operated freely on British soil from 1941 until the end of the war. To understand why this mattered so enormously, it is necessary to understand just how catastrophic the intelligence situation appeared at the outset of the conflict. Germany had spent the late 1930s constructing what it believed to be a comprehensive espionage network across Britain. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence organization, had recruited agents across Europe, many of whom were tasked with infiltrating Britain undercover as refugees, students, businessmen, or neutral nationals. By the time war was formally declared in September 1939, German intelligence was confident it possessed a network capable of providing strategic information about British defences, manufacturing capacity, and military planning. The British knew this network existed. What they did not initially know was how many agents there were, where they were operating, or, critically, how to distinguish the genuine intelligence reaching Berlin from fabricated material. British counterintelligence, then housed primarily within MI5 under the directorship of Sir David Petrie, faced a problem that seemed, in the early months, very nearly intractable. You could arrest a spy. You could imprison him. You could, under wartime law, execute him. But if you arrested every German agent the moment he was identified, you gained an individual and lost the network. You had no way of knowing who else was out there, what cover stories they were using, or what Berlin currently believed about British capabilities. The only solution, theoretically elegant but operationally terrifying, was to do something else entirely. You let him keep transmitting, but you controlled every word he sent. The organization that made this possible was the 20 Committee, convened in January 1941 under the chairmanship of John Cecil Masterman, an Oxford academic with a talent for dry wit and an extraordinary capacity for managing what was essentially a complicated, high-stakes deception operation run simultaneously on multiple human beings at once. The Roman numeral for 20 is XX, which meant the committee was also known, with characteristic British understatement, as the double-cross system. The technical mechanism was straightforward enough in principle. German agents who landed in Britain, many of them arriving by parachute or small boat, were, in the great majority of cases, identified and captured within days or even hours of arrival. Several had been betrayed before they even set foot on British soil. Once captured, each agent was presented with a choice: cooperate fully, transmit to Hamburg exactly what MY5 told them to transmit, and live; refuse, and face the alternative. The overwhelming majority chose to cooperate. Those who did became what the British called double agents, sending back to Germany a carefully managed stream of intelligence, all of it approved, fabricated, or strategically shaped by the 20 Committee. The genius of the system lay not in the individual deceptions, but in their collective consistency. Each double agent had to transmit in his own personal style, using his individual Morse code rhythm, what wireless operators called a fist, because German signals intelligence was sophisticated enough to detect a substitution. The rhythm of the hand on the transmitter key was as individually identifiable as a fingerprint, and any abrupt change would immediately signal to Hamburg that something had gone wrong. Every double agent was therefore allowed to transmit in his own genuine style, which meant that someone had to know each agent well enough to ensure his behavior, his personality, and his observable daily life remained convincingly authentic. This is where the mundane details of British civilian life became, quite unexpectedly, one of the most potent tools in the counterintelligence arsenal. Agents being run by MI5 had to be seen to be living believably ordinary lives. They had to visit shops, take public transport, interact with neighbors, listen to the wireless, attend local events. The rhythms of the BBC Home Service, its schedules, its music programs, its news bulletins, provided the texture of civilian normalcy that a convincing cover required. An agent who never mentioned the music he had heard the previous evening, or who seemed ignorant of the running jokes on a popular program, might seem, to a careful handler in Hamburg, subtly wrong. The timing of transmissions was equally critical. The 20 Committee controlled not just the content of messages, but when they were sent, calibrating each transmission to reflect what an agent in that location, with that access, might plausibly have discovered in the time since the last contact. Too much information too quickly suggested the agent had an unrealistically broad network of sources. Too little, and he appeared inactive or incompetent. The committee spent extraordinary effort maintaining what amounted to a fictional biography for each double agent, a detailed account of his movements, his social contacts, his subsources, so that the intelligence he reported fit together into a coherent, believable picture. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans, for their part, were remarkably trusting. The Abwehr was a deeply political organization in 1941, riddled with internal competition and vulnerable to institutional pressure to report successes upward. An agent who was producing results was an asset worth protecting. Questioning his intelligence too rigorously risked undermining the careers of those who had recruited and run him. This made the Abwehr, paradoxically, more susceptible to deception than a more skeptical organization might have been. The operational achievements of the double-cross system are, even now, startling to contemplate. The most consequential single application came in the months before the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944. Operation Bodyguard and its component part, Operation Fortitude, used the double-agent network to convince the German High Command that the main Allied invasion would not target Normandy at all, but rather the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel and the most logical landing site from a purely geographical perspective. The deception was anchored around a fictional army group, the 1st United States Army Group, supposedly stationed in southeast England under the command of General George Patton, whose reputation the Germans respected enormously. This fictional force was given real addresses, real wireless traffic, real supply requisitions, and real intelligence reports, all generated and transmitted by double agents. The double agent at the center of this effort was a Catalan named Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the British as Garbo, and to the Germans as Alaric. He had, with almost no formal training and considerable personal initiative, constructed an entirely fictional network of sub-agents across Britain, all of them invented, all of them transmitting plausible intelligence back to Hamburg through Garcia himself. The Germans trusted him so completely that on the morning of June 6, 1944, hours after the first Allied troops had landed on the Normandy beaches, Garcia transmitted a message warning his German handlers that the Normandy landings were a feint and that the real invasion was still to come at the Pas de Calais. Hitler, receiving this intelligence from an agent he considered among his most reliable, personally ordered 2 Panzer divisions held back in reserve rather than committed to the Normandy counterattack. Those 2 divisions might, in the judgment of several military historians, have been sufficient to push the Allied forces back into the sea in the critical first days of the invasion. The German equivalents to the double-cross system were, by comparison, deeply ineffective. German counterintelligence in this period was divided between the Abwehr, which reported to the Wehrmacht, and the SD, Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence arm of the SS. The 2 organizations were, for much of the war, engaged in a bitter bureaucratic rivalry that undermined operational coordination. The Abwehr under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who was later executed by the Nazis on suspicion of complicity in the July 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler, was in any case riddled with officers who had serious reservations about the regime they served. Several were actively passing information to Allied intelligence. The German attempt to run a comparable deception operation, Operation Nordpol, was directed against the Dutch resistance and the British Special Operations Executive. It succeeded initially. German counterintelligence captured SOE wireless operators and used their equipment and codes to maintain contact with London, receiving further agents and supply drops for nearly 2 years before the deception was uncovered. However, the Germans lacked the centralized coordination and the institutional patience that characterized the British operation. They were running a local deception for tactical gains. The British were running a strategic deception across an entire theatre of war. The legacy of the double-cross system extends far beyond the Second World War, though the full extent of its influence is difficult to measure because so much of it operates in domains where influence, by design, cannot be traced. The basic principles: controlling the information an adversary receives, maintaining deception across multiple channels simultaneously, using the adversary's own trust as a weapon against him, became foundational to post-war Western intelligence doctrine. The CIA's training programs drew extensively on the British experience. NATO's deception planning for the Cold War period built upon frameworks first developed in the cramped offices of MI5 during the Blitz. Masterman himself published an account of the double-cross system in 1972, after a long battle with the British government, which was deeply reluctant to allow any public discussion of the operations methods. The book, simply titled The Double-Cross System, remains one of the clearest accounts of how strategic deception functions in practice, and it is still read in intelligence training programs around the world. What strikes most readers encountering the story for the first time is not the complexity of the technical arrangements, impressive as those were, but the human dimension. The double agents were not, in the main, ideological warriors. Many were frightened, isolated people caught between 2 powers and choosing survival over principle. Some developed genuine affection for their British handlers. Juan Pujol Garcia was awarded both the MBE by the British government and, with magnificent irony, the Iron Cross by the German government. The only man in the war to have received both. Return now to that damp flat in South London. The German agent sits by his wireless. He hears a tune. He hums along. He does not know that his every transmission has been read before it reached Hamburg. He does not know that the intelligence he has been so carefully collecting has been shaped, amended, and in some cases entirely fabricated by men and women working in offices barely 2 miles away. He does not know that the very normalcy of his life, the wireless programs, the corner shop conversations, the particular Morse rhythms of his trembling hand, has been used not to conceal him, but to make him useful to the people who were hunting him. He will be arrested. He will be given a choice. He will, in all probability, cooperate. And then he will sit at his transmitter again, tapping out his familiar fist, sending messages that are not his own, to handlers who will never know the difference, about an invasion that will not come where they are told it will come, on behalf of a country that did all of this not with overwhelming force, but with patience, intelligence, and an almost preternatural capacity for pretending that everything is perfectly ordinary. The Germans believed they had a network. They had, instead, a mirror, and the British had been holding it the whole time.